lots and lots and lots, hundreds of species of grasses and flowers, but there's a number of key indicator species that if we find orchids in a grassland, we know for sure it's not an improved grassland. Then a wet grassland would have like ragged robin and wetland plants, whereas the dry grasslands again would have different dry species. So we have indicators. So if we find a number of indicators, we can be sure that that's a special grassland first of all, and a special wet or dry, and also then that it will also have the associated biodiversity.
It's great to be back with another Environment Edge podcast, and you're very welcome to the show.
Do you know what a species-rich grassland looks like, or if you have one on your farm? Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist Dr. Catherine Keena joins us to discuss natural and semi-natural grassland.
I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome back for another Environment Edge podcast number 85, and here we go.
Hi Catherine, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Catherine, there's loads of different types of grassland in Ireland. Could you elaborate just slightly on the different types?
Yeah, there are lots, but I suppose they fall into two main categories, Deirdre. Like we have improved grassland and unimproved grassland. So the improved grassland is the very productive ryegrass swards that we probably think of mostly when we think of grassland. Very, very good for producing food. And that's what, produces our milk, the majority of our milk and our beef. Then, but some grasslands have never been reseeded or improved, and they still produce food. They still produce cattle and beef and milk, but they wouldn't have the ryegrass content because that wouldn't be there naturally. And then the old grasses and the flowers that are in them have a special value from a biodiversity point of view. I suppose if you go back 50 years, that's what all our grassland looked like. And a lot of it then has been improved or forested. But so there's less of the unimproved special grasslands left. And I suppose that's why in recent years we've recognised them as being very special, because they are full of all the species, full of the biodiversity that isn't in the productive grassland.
Well, Catherine, I'm from the west of Ireland, and I suppose would the soil type or where you're located have any variance on the kind of naturally occurring plants within the area?
Absolutely. Now, I suppose maybe the first thing that they probably wouldn't be improved if certain soils that are difficult to improve are more likely to not be improved, if you know what I mean. But you are right. I mean, again, a very broad generalization of that species-rich grassland would be wet and dry. For example, the Curragh in Kildare is a prime example of really valuable dry grassland, which again has never been reseeded or ploughed or fertilized. And it has a unique wax cap grassland. There's fungi growing there, and similarly we were recently on Clare Island, and there's similar grasslands on it, a very, very special wax cap grassland. So they're dry, but I think the majority of soils that are unimproved would be wet grassland, partly because they were more difficult to improve, and they again have different species. So again, we have there's indicator species. There's lots and lots and lots, hundreds of species of grasses and flowers, but there's a number of key indicator species that if we find orchids in a grassland, we know for sure it's not an improved grassland. Then a wet grassland would have like ragged robin and very different wetland plants, whereas the dry grasslands again would have different dry species. So we have indicators. So if we find a number of indicators, we can be sure that that's a special grassland first of all, and a special wet or dry, and also then that it will also have the associated biodiversity. We just use plants, and we actually only use flowers because they're the easiest to identify. But if we have a flower-rich, species-rich grassland, we know then the soil underneath it will have all the associated soil biodiversity. We know that the bees and the butterflies will be there, which won't be in an improved grassland.
Catherine, When I'm listening to you now, I'm kind of getting the picture that when I'm driving by a field and I'm going to see loads of lovely flowers amongst the grass. If to the untrained eye, how do you identify those species-rich grassland, or if you're driving up the road, how would you know the difference, or what do they look like?
I suppose you just said it first, although we don't want to get hung up on the flowers because you can have old wet grasslands that certainly at times of years won't look flowery or the flowers are small. So to the untrained eye, I suppose they look different to the bright green ryegrass. Cahill is the main thing, and then the variety would be the main thing. Even you don't need to know your species to know that it's an old species-rich grassland. So other than a field covered in maybe a particular noxious weed that you wouldn't want, anything that's diverse is likely to be good. And then it's amazing. You ask how you learn. I mean, a couple of years ago, agricultural advisors wouldn't have known in general known all those species, and now they have walked all those lands in the country and have identified, say, the key ones of 20 species. So with the flowers are easy to identify, to be honest, and that's why they're used as indicators.
Would it be important to say basically that they're not abandoned either?
Deirdre, absolutely. Yes, because those species are there because they're being grazed. And the minute if you know yourself, if you leave an area of your garden and if you don't cut it, now cutting it, delaying mowing is good, but once scrub will take over. So that can be a good habitat too, but we definitely don't want scrub taken over on species-rich special grasslands that are more rare. So it's if even within a year, it's amazing the Shannon Callows, where they can't be cut within a year, the grass becomes very rank. The birds, the breeding waders can't get through it, and the more sensitive plants are swamped out. So you are so right. So number one is not to reseed, not to fertilize, not to lime, but number two is must graze. I agree with you.
I see that type of grassland, Catherine, and that rank grassland you talk about, and it could be there for years and years, and it gets very tufty and thick. And is it the grasses are out competing the sort of certain species of flowers and stuff that you'd like to come through?
And the specific strong grasses, Cahill, not
Yeah, yeah.
you'll end up with cocksfoot timothy, which is can be good, and they all have their listen. Everything is good in biodiversity. Everything has its associated species, and so it's kind of what we want, but we definitely don't want to lose those special grasslands because they're rare and gone. Whereas if it's an ordinary piece of grass or lawn, if it goes, it's replaceable, if you know what I mean.
You're kind of after answering my question. I was going to ask you where they kind of found, but I suppose the issue we have at the moment in Ireland is if we are pushing production, that's going to make those species rich grasslands suffer a little bit. And how do we find a balance there? I suppose is the trick.
That's the point, Cahill, and it's not my opinion that counts there. I suppose it's what do we want in the country? Do we want forestry? Do we want intense improved ryegrass? And do we want species-rich grassland, and what proportion? And again, that's a land use issue. I think and we have competing targets, haven't we? We have food and then we have food, but I think it's accepted now that we want food at a sustainable food production. That's a given. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, that may not have been there. I think again, forestry, we want it in the right place. So, and I think with the crisis in biodiversity, we have a serious issue worldwide and in Ireland in the loss of biodiversity, the loss of species. So just to give you an example, 1/3 of our bee species are under threat of extinction. Now, the third that are under pressure are the ones that are associated with plants that are under pressure. So it's not a case of, oh, we'll have some flowers and we'll get the bees back, because individual species, and this again we probably know more about the pollinators, but this goes for all the ugly looking millipedes and centipedes and everything, that they all are associated with a specific plant. And if that plant goes, and there was interesting research in Holland a few years ago, they looked at the plants the bees in the Natural History Museum, that had been around years ago. And again, it was obvious that they are associated with plants that have also gone. So that's why these grasslands are very, very special, because if they go, they will lose a huge suite of species.
Do they naturally generate, Catherine, or can you introduce what you want?
I just say 100 years, Deirdre.
All right, okay.
I may be slightly exaggerating, but I wouldn't be far off it. Once you disturb the soil, you're disturbing the fungus, all the different elements. It's a bit like an old rainforest, an old forest. You can't recreate it overnight.
I'm going to say a dirty word now, Catherine, and I'd like you to comment on it. Seed mixes. What's your feeling on these seed mixes?
Like the wildflower
Yeah.
seed mixes? No, totally don't recommend them. I mean, they're grand in your garden. We plant ornamentals in our garden. I stay out of the garden, Cathal.
Yeah.
I don't get involved in the garden, but for a number of reasons, they're extremely expensive. They don't work. They're gone in a few years. But I suppose they're unregulated, so they can bring in unwanted. Once you buy something that's approved by gone through the system, it's tested for purity and germination. There is no
grass was an
regulation
issue before, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're not allowed. I couldn't sell grass today because it would have to be tested before, if I collected grass seed. So similarly, but there is no regulation for wildflower. But from the biodiversity point of view, I suppose, which is my point, the big worry about introducing, let's say we have a lovely species-rich grassland there and we have plants in it. And if we bring in a plant from another country or even from another part of Ireland, it will be acting differently. It will be flowering and fruiting at a different time. And it could interact with my native one. And we could have bad consequences, or it also has bad consequences for the associated invertebrates. Again, the mayfly or whatever that's waiting for this to come out may be tricked into it being at the wrong time. The good example there that's often always quoted is the bluebells. We have lovely Irish bluebells growing, and Spanish bluebells were brought in here. Again, often garden escapees are our problem, much more of a problem than people sowing them. And the Spanish bluebell, not only is it out in the wild now, but it's also crossbreeding with the Irish bluebell. And now we're losing our Irish bluebell. So you can see the less interference with nature, the better. Let nature take its course always.
Are they under threat at the moment, Catherine? Are there any supports for farmers nationally to address this issue?
Yeah, for I suppose it's always been recognised and paid for, but the huge change in policy with the current agri-environment scheme acres is that farmers are being paid on if they choose this grassland or in acres CP, all the land is scored, and if I have the number of species and the variety of these indicator species we're talking about, and if the sward is being managed appropriately, not undergrazed, as you mentioned earlier, not overgrazed, the farmer will get more scores, and that equals more money. And so the ryegrass field would get 0 in a results-based payment system, but obviously it is very productive. It's not meaning it's zero value. It's zero value from the biodiversity point of view, but it's huge food production. And then the species-rich grassland under a low-input grassland league, or in the grassland in the CP areas, they're being scored, and you might get a 10 out of 10, and you'll get your highest payment. And you get paid for these plants now.
Excellent.
Catherine, I just come back to, I just know a few farmers that thought they're doing the right thing about just leaving a field go and not doing anything with it. And you're coming on very strongly saying that we have to have farmers involved in managing it correctly to get the best from our swards, which makes sense to me. But could some of those farmers, if they have those rank swards, just mow them down, and will it come right quickly enough then after that?
Absolutely. I mean, if it's long enough turned into scrub or rank grassland, you may have lost some of the species, but it's amazing what comes back, either from like lawns prevent plants flowering, rank grass prevents plants, sensitive plants flowering. So it's amazing, by either letting a lawn grow or by cutting rank grassland, you will just never know what will pop up. Grazing, or sometimes these areas, I'm not sure what you're in your head there, but sometimes these areas are inaccessible, so maybe they can't be grazed easily, and that's where your animals come in. Whatever can graze it doesn't matter matter what it is if it can be grazed. So that's, unless you wanted to turn to scrub. As I said, it's a case of so many people come on to me, I want to leave this to rewild it is the word, which I don't like, rewild it and leave it for nature. So that's, the two questions, I think, in 10 or 20 years time, do you want it to look like a scrub, which is, as I said, a valuable grass, a valuable habitat full of all the other species? Or do you, in general, that's not what the people are thinking of, or do you want it to look like a grassland that has a a diverse grassland? And there's your answer. One must be grazed, one must be left. The scrub is on its way to being a woodland, which again is a lovely thing, but you need to think, what do I want 10 years time? And I think sometimes the no-mow message has again been misinterpreted. What we mean by the no-mow is don't mow till September. We want everything cut after the first, not everything, but we want things cut after. We want to not to cut during the summer when things are flowering and going to seed, but after the 1st of September, maybe not every year, but we want things, that's the time then. You either decide then, am I letting it into a scrub woodland, which is fine, or am I maintaining it as a grassland? And in that case, it must be cut or grazed. Ideally, removing the stuff, that's not always easy. Again, we're talking about lots of farmers and acres are managing margins, and they must cut. They don't have to remove the stuff. It would be better if they did, because again, what we want here is low nutrients.
Is there a fine line with grazing management?
No, there is. I mean, we don't want it heavily poached, but again, in my experience over all the years, the only time that land is either poached or hammered is when there's a feeder in there. In general, if the animal is out pottering around, maybe yes, they can be slightly overgrazed, but it's usually when the feeder goes in that that's when the system goes out of kilter altogether.
And I think that just going back then to the main reason why we put these species-rich grasslands in, I was talking to a tillage farmer there not so long ago, and he was talking to me about he puts different varieties of plants in to encourage predator species to take out maybe some of his pests. But that's a part of going back to your bees. So certain species of plant will bring different bees in. What's your idea on that?
You mean sowing plants?
Yeah, not necessarily sowing, but I suppose going back to your point of you have to decide what kind of habitat you want, or where you let it off and go wild, or where you have the wildflowers in it. And it's probably good to have a mixture of all types of habitats.
Well, definitely not the wildflowers.
Yeah.
Now, in a tillage situation, I think what we do, when you're starting with bare ground, you can either live through the problem with the annual, not problem, but the annuals and looking untidy and maybe causing a problem. So in tillage situations, in the schemes, we would sow a cocksfoot ryegrass, because that the tillage farmers want, and it's still good, it's fantastic for the biodiversity, is to have a rough grass margin sown. So if you have bare ground and you can't wait for it to kind of settle itself over the years and could cause problems, is it the sterile brome that comes out into the field? So the absolute recommendation for tillage farmers is to sow your cocksfoot Timothy mix where you're starting with bare ground, and then that will, over time, and it has a value in its own right. That's the rough grass margins, even if there's not a flower in them, is the place where is the food place for the barn owl and all the owls and the predators, because that's where the shrews and the field mice are. And that's when the barn owls, when they were tracked, where they went out at night, was they follow the rough grass margins, the rough grass on the side of the road, and that's where they're feeding off of. So it doesn't have to look pretty to be of value. I suppose that's the point.
That's the barn owl restaurants along that road there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, lovely. Yeah. I'll use that one again, Carl.
Catherine, you have a good bit of stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks and months. I think you're starting off with a farmland biodiversity event in Burr on the 28th from 11 o'clock to 3. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what people can expect maybe?
Yeah, we're going to Burcastle Estate because there's a meadow there that has been unimproved for hundreds of years, has been cut every year, and the meadow removed. So it's a true 10 out of 10 scoring meadow. So we have an event there that is available for people to book, and we're covering all biodiversity. I suppose we want to get the message out. It's not just, we're very worried about a single species focus. If you go down the road of looking after one species, you can do harm to others. And that's what we need to understand. The biodiversity is in the soil, it's in the water, it's in the woodland, it's in the grassland, the peatland, it's in the farmyard. So we're covering all those on the day with all the experts in those fields. So for people, it's free, providing you a book today to get in there, teagasc.ie/farmland biodiversity. If you, that's and you go in and book your place. So it's in on Wednesday the 28th at 11 to 3.
Yep, I'll be there myself on the soil stand, so people can come to see myself and you there and have a chat.
And you might have the worms with you.
Oh, we'll have worms, and we'll have lots of other good, interesting details. So hopefully people come along, because it's a great day and a great venue, and it leads into exactly what we discussed here today. You're going to see a Rolls-Royce version of a species-rich grassland, which is great. And that's only the start. You have Hedgerow Week coming up from the 2nd to the 6th of September as well.
Yeah, so we have our usual signpost webinars, and we have an event at 11 o'clock each day on the Teagasc farms, where we have a demo of a hedgerow that has been planted over the last 3 years, 10 metres each year. So we're starting on Monday in Ballyhaise, Tuesday in Athenry, Wednesday in Clonakilty, Thursday in Curtains in Moore Park, and Friday in Kildalton, all at 11 o'clock, just a walk for a morning walk around the newly planted hedges that have been planted over the last couple of years, because there's a lot of farmers now who are going to plant this autumn in acres, and others. So anyone planting a hedge, please come along and get your hedge, get your thoughts, get the hedge that you want.
Yeah, there's still a few very heavily attacked hedgerows out there. I see a lot of short back and sides in the last couple of weeks even. So we need, this is about your 3rd or 4th year in on Hedgerow Week as well, isn't it?
Oh,
You've done a lot.
I think it could be 6.
Yeah, 6th off, you're flying it. So I know from previous hedgerows, there's very, very good information we saw it there, and a lot of good work done, because you can see a lot of very, very nice hedgerows around the country this year again. So hopefully you'll continue, and best of luck in that. Catherine, just like to say thanks very much for joining us on the show today. Really interesting as always, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So there you have it. Tune in next time to hear more interesting chats and discussion.
Myself and Deirdre will be back in 2 weeks' time, but do give us a review on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Environment Edge podcast.